Okay, guys, I know the screen is not the most enjoyable screen to see, so real quick, Kent and I are here to talk again today, and as we discussed, we were going to talk about the temporary residential leases. So without further ado, I'm going to move to that screen so it's not as eye-jarring. Kent, can you see my screen?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about the buyer's temporary residential lease and the seller's temporary residential lease today. I talked about this not too long ago with Andrew, and Kent actually called me afterwards and scared me to death. So we'll be going over that conversation later. What you need to remember is possession occurs one of two ways. Upon closing and funding, which means that's to fund, seller has to get their check before the buyer gets their keys, or according to the terms of a temporary residential lease. So if you use a temporary residential lease, possession is occurred, and that is extremely important to understand. And there's some verbiage in this lease that I want to make sure all parties understand as well when we're going through and talking about this. Now we're going to go into one very in depth. A lot of the buyers and the sellers temporary residential lease marry each other, so those parts we'll be able to skim over. So we'll spend a lot more time on one of them than the other. So just prepared for that and understand it. Things to understand first, parentheses at the top, for use only when buyer occupies the property for no more than 90 days prior to the closing. You cannot use a temporary residential lease for more than 90 days. If you're going to do it for more than 90 days, it is an actual lease, and you need to use an actual lease form. So just understand that this is a temporary lease, not a long-term situation. Parties to leases are blank the landlord, which is the seller, and blank the tenant, which is the buyer. The tenant is still the buyer because the seller owned the house at this time. Landlord leases to tenant the property described in the contract between landlord as seller and tenant as buyer, known as blank. We're going to put the address in there just like we do on the contract. So nothing crazy so far. Term of this lease commences on blank and terminates as specified in paragraph 18. So we'll get down to paragraph 18. Paragraph 18 basically says when the deal closes. Rental will be blank dollars per day. Upon commencement of this lease, tenant shall pay landlord the full amount of rental of blank for the anticipated term of this lease. Commencement date to the closing date specified in paragraph 9 of the contract. So if we're going to move in 14 days early, we're going to come up with an amount per day. Normally what you're going to see there is someone's going to take their mortgage payment divided by 30, and that's going to be the daily rental. Now we're going to times that by the number of days we're doing, and that money is going to be required to be paid in advance before you get the keys to rent the property. If the actual term of this lease differs from the anticipated term, any additional rent or reimbursement will be paid at closing. No portion of the rental will be applied to payment of any items covered by the contract. So the nice thing about this lease, if you owe more days, you pay it at closing. If you owe less days, you get reimbursed at the closing table. Now the seller side does not work this way, so we want to make sure we discuss the differences when the time comes. Deposit. Tenant is paid to landlord blank as a deposit to secure performance of this lease by tenant. If this lease is terminated before the closing date, landlord may use the deposit to satisfy tenant's obligations under this lease. Landlord shall refund to tenant any unused portion of the deposit together with an itemized list of all deductions from the deposit within 30 days after tenant A, surrenders possession of the property, and B, provides landlord written notice of tenant's boarding address. A lot of people don't understand that. It's true with property management as well. Until you have given me a written notice of where to send your money, or the clock does not start. So you're like, well, I moved out 6 weeks ago. You did, but you still haven't given us notification of where you're going. So the clock has not started yet. And that's an important thing to understand, both in temporary residential leases and real leases as well. If the lease is terminated by closing and the funding of the sale of the property, the deposit will be refunded to tenant at closing and funding. Notice, deposit must be addition to the earnest money under this contract. It says it very clearly. The earnest money does not count as deposit. It cannot be deposit. It's a completely separate thing. Utilities. Tenant shall pay all utilities, connections, deposits, and charges except blank, which landlord shall pay. So if the seller is going to continue to pay any utilities, they will write those in. Now, normally, I'm not going to recommend that because if I'm not paying the electric bill, my air conditioner is going to run at 60 degrees for 24 hours a day, even if I'm not home. Use of property. Tenant may use the property only for residential purposes. Tenant may not assign the lease or sublet any part of the property. Tenant may not keep any pets on the property, except if you're going to have a pet, we've got to have it in there and have that knowledge now. Tenant accepts the property in its present condition and state of repair, but landlord shall make all repairs and improvements required by the contract. If this lease is terminated prior to closing, tenant shall surrender possession of the property to the landlord in its present condition, as improved by landlord, except normal wear and tear and the casualty loss. Alterations. This is where it gets crazy, guys. Tenant may not make any holes or drive nails into woodwork, floors, walls, or ceilings, alter, paint, or decorate the property, install improvements or fixtures without prior written consent of landlord. Any improvements or fixtures placed on the property during the lease become a part of the property. If you move in early in a temporary residential lease, you can't hang anything on a nail unless the hole is already in the wall. How often do you think that happens, Ken?
Zero.
Huh?
I mean, it happens every time.
Yeah, and that's the thing
and they this gets violated worse than I got horror stories about this.
And I should have started with this. These are a absolute positively worst case last ditch effort scenario situation. The problem with a home, and Ken has sold a couple, I've sold a couple, I've bought a couple, I assume Ken's bought a couple and moved into. You start noticing little things about your home that you didn't notice before once you move into it.
Yep.
There's always going to be a couple things that you didn't notice, you overlooked. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize this happened when I flushed the toilet. Whatever it is, if you're in there on a temporary residential lease, and just giving that buyer that much more opportunity to complain, to issue, to cause issues, because there's going to be something that they're going to find when they move in that home. I guarantee it. New home, used home, old home, I don't care.
Yep.
So, the reason the buyer wants to move in early is because they want to move in early. They want to nest. They want to put their belongings away. They don't want to live in a box. They want to put all their pictures on the walls. And they have said in paragraph 10 of this contract, they will not drive a single nail into a single piece of anything that is going to get broken. Paragraph 11, again, do not ever write in paragraph 11. Inspections. Landlord may enter at reasonable times to inspect, replace, repair, complete the improvements. Tenant shall provide landlord door keys and access codes to allow access to the property. Tenant shall comply with applicable laws, restrictions, ordinances, rules, regulations with respect to the property. Repairs and maintenance. Again, guys, we've talked about this. If it's underlined, it's extremely important.
Yep.
Except as otherwise provided in this lease, tenant shall bear all expenses of repairing, replacing, and maintaining the property, included but not limited to the yard, trees, shrubs, equipment, appliances, unless otherwise required by Texas Property Code. Tenant shall promptly repair all at tenant's expense any damage to the property caused directly or indirectly by any act or omission of the tenant or any person other than landlord, landlord's agents, or invitees. This is crazy, guys. So what you're saying is, because remember, possession occurs according to the terms of a temporary residential lease, which means the buyer has accepted the property and accepted possession of the property. So if something breaks, the buyer is responsible for fixing it, not the seller. This is huge, and this goes along with air conditioner breaks. You're responsible for it now, not the seller.
Yep.
The buyer is, and that is something that becomes a huge fight when it comes into play. And a lot of people don't read paragraph 14 of a temporary residential lease until there's an issue or there's a fight and go, oh, looks like you're responsible for this and not the seller.
Well, and then it goes into the play that, let's say we put a home warranty in place, is, the home warranty doesn't really take effect until they close on the property.
Right.
So if they didn't put a seller's warranty in place, then now we don't even have that to fall back on.
Exactly. So paragraph 14 is one of those terrifying paragraphs where you go, oh crap, buyer has accepted this property and this is the situation that we're in now. So you need to understand that if you're representing a buyer or a seller, the buyer is now responsible for any and all repairs unless they were already agreed to in a contract previously. So paragraph 14 alone is one that should make you terrified and never want to use these forms. Indemnity. Tenant indemnifies landlord from claims of all third parties for injury or damage to person or property. Such third party arises from use or occupancy of the property by tenant. The indemnification includes attorney's fees, costs, and expenses. So if someone gets hurt on the property, the tenant has said they will cover all legal expenses for the seller. It's the buyer's responsibility now. Landlord and tenant shall each maintain such insurance on the contents of property as each party may deem appropriate. during the term of this lease. Note, consult your insurance agent. Possession of the property by a buyer as a tenant may change insurance policy coverage. I am not an attorney. I am not an insurance agent. But what this is saying very clearly is if you move in as a temporary residential lease prior to closing, you are a tenant. If the house burns down, your belongings will most likely not be covered unless you have renter's insurance and you're in the process of buying a home, so you're probably not thinking about renter's insurance. The seller's belongings will not, insurance will not cover your loss.
That doesn't happen.
Huh?
So I said, don't think for 1 second that hasn't happened.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing. They're going to say, listen, yeah, we're going to cover you, but you haven't bought the policy yet. You buy the policy at closing, so you don't have an insurance policy. The seller may be in the same boat because the seller may not have renter's insurance or renter's coverage on his home. And they may say, since you're renting the home and not living in it, we don't have to pay you.
Right.
So if you're doing this, you've got to make sure your insurance company knows what's going on and you are properly covered both as the buyer and as the seller. And again, I'm not telling you what will or won't happen. I'm telling you the horrors I've seen where a buyer has moved in the day before closing, the house is burned down, all of their belongings burned up, and they weren't covered by insurance.
Absolutely.
It's a horrible, horrible day for everyone.
Yep.
Default.
We'll get a referral from that client.
Yeah. If tenant fails to perform or reserve any provision of this lease and fails within 24 hours notice by landlord to commence and diligently pursue to remedy such failure, tenant will be in default. Termination. As we talked about paragraph 18 earlier in this agreement. This lease terminates upon either A, closing and funding of the sale under the contract, B, termination of the contract prior to closing, or tenant's default under this lease, or tenant's default under the contract, whichever occurs first. Upon termination other than by closing and funding of the sale, tenant shall surrender possession of the property. Holding over. Now, this is where I'm gonna give you my advice.
Right there.
Huh?
I'd like to say something right there.
Do, please.
Because it's very critical that you understand that default under the contract is a big issue. Something happened. They didn't get their funding in place. Something's gone crazy at that point in time if it defaults under the contract. Guess what? They're in the house.
Yeah. And getting them out of the house could be, especially in today's COVID-rich environment, a nightmare.
Yeah.
Holdover. I'm going to give you my broker opinion here, but we're going to go through it later. Any possession by tenant after termination creates a tenancy at severance and will not operate to renew or extend this lease. Tenant shall pay blank per day during the period of the possession after termination as damages, in addition to any other remedies to which landlord is entitled. I put a very large number here as kind of a scare tactic. If we're charging $50 a day, I'm going to put $150 a day, possibly $200 a day, just saying, hey, get out of the house.
Yeah, I've always made it a rule of thumb on holdovers that you need to make it where it's going to cost them more to stay in the house than it would if they had to go get a hotel.
Exactly. Again, the attorney section, the prevailing party in any legal proceeding brought under or with respect to this lease is entitled to recovery from non-prevailing party of all costs of such proceedings and reasonable attorney's fees. Smoke alarms. Now, this is where it gets a little crazy. Texas Property Code requires landlord to install smoke alarms in certain locations within the property at landlord's expense. Tenant expressly waives landlord's duty to inspect and repair smoke alarms. So you're selling this home, you don't care, you're done, you've moved on. Well, according to tenant law, you have to have a smoke alarm in every bedroom and every hallway heading to a bedroom on every floor. So now, even though everything's good to go and you're ready to move forward, you now have to install up to 6 smoke alarms according to the terms of this lease.
Yep.
So you need to understand that it has to be done. Now, the one nice thing is paragraph 22, requirements of the Texas Property Code relating to security devices do not apply to a residential lease for a term of 90 days. You do not have to change the locks, whereas in a residential lease, you have to hire a licensed locksmith to come in and change the locks. That is not required. Now, as a buyer, that's a little terrifying because who knows how many people have a key to your house.
Exactly.
A seller could have a friend, a neighbor, a niece, a nephew, a kid, a college roommate, whatever has keys to your home, and it should be terrifying.
Yeah.
Consult your attorney. Real estate licensees cannot give legal advice. This lease is extended to be legally binding. Read it carefully if you do not understand the effect of this lease, and consult your attorney before signing. All notices of the party will be given to each Must be in writing and effective when mailed. To hand delivered at or transmitted by facsimile or electronic transmission as follows. Landlord's or seller's information, tenant, buyer's information, have them sign it.
So
I hope you guys have understood the fears that go into the effect with this form and what can be done. We're going to go through the seller's temporary residential lease
before we
now.
leave this one, I want to say something.
Okay.
Okay. So from a buyer's temporary lease, I would, before I ever would allow my client to agree to it, go talk to your broker. See what their opinion is of it. I mean, I think Andrew and I have the same opinion. Is last case scenario, it's got to be really something crazy for me to even say, yes, this is a good idea. Okay. Letting somebody move into the house before they have the money to close and fund on it is a scary situation, guys. I've had people stay in a house for over a year without being able to close on it. Okay. It puts everybody in a bad situation. So be sure you consult with your broker before you let this happen.
Yes, because once it's done, it's done. Seller's temporary residence.
You were saying during COVID,
yeah,
you can't evict them.
And same is true on seller's side. I was actually reading a news article the other day about a couple who have bought a house a year and a half ago. I've been paying for it for a year and a half, and the seller didn't move out, and they can't get him out of the house.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's crazy what can happen and what you can deal with. So, seller's temporary residential lease is kind of the same way. The only true carrot you have as a buyer to make sure the home is left in the condition you want is not purchasing the home.
Right.
So we want to go through the seller's temporary residential lease side. Again, guys, it's extremely dangerous. So many things can go wrong. It is a last-ditch effort of we have to do this or else, but be very careful in these things. It works the same way again. In this situation, the landlord is actually the buyer and the tenant is the seller. So the properties of this lease are buyer's name will go under landlord and seller's name will go under tenant.
And that gets screwed up more than anything I see.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's confusing. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't sound right.
Yeah.
Landlord leases to tenant the property described in the contract between landlord as buyer and tenant. As seller known as, again, you're going to put the property address there. And I think probably if they put the paragraph lease section above the party section, it would help people understand that a little bit better because they kind of explain it after they've already looked at it. Term of this lease commences on the date of sale covered by the contract is closed and funded and terminates blank unless started earlier by reason of other provisions. Now, paragraph 4, the rental section works completely different on the sales side than it did on the buyer side. Tenant shall pay to landlord as rental blank dollars per day, excluding day of closing and funding. Again, remember, date of funding is date 0, so it does not apply. Seller owns the home through day of closing. So you're going to assume it's going to be blank amount of days. With the full amount of rental for the term of the lease to be paid at time of funding of the sale. Tenant will not be entitled to a refund of rental if this lease terminates early due to tenant's default or voluntary return of the property. So say you need 2 weeks, you're going to pay blank dollars per day times the 14 days that you're asking for. If you move out in 4 days, you do not get reimbursed the 10 days that are left over. And that creates a little issue. And I've seen people be very, I don't want to say childish, but then they're saying, fine, if that's mine for that time, I'm going to keep the keys and I'm not going to give it to you for another 10 days.
So I'm going to give you, and again, talk to your broker before you do this, but I'm going to give you a little trick that I've always used in terms. Okay. So as you're going through zip forms, I don't know if you know this, but here's a little trick. When you move your cursor in there, if you put your space bar, you can turn that place green. When it's green, you can type whatever you want. All right. So that's probably not great advice, but here's what I always had all of my agents always do was put the exact number of days. Okay. So if or hours, if we're going to move out, if you got 72 hours to lease a house before you have to release it, we can verify that. If you say we're going to move out on a certain date and then the closing gets pushed back, and you only get 2 days instead of 10 days like you thought you're going to have, this never changed. You still got to move out in those 2 days. It doesn't move just because the closing didn't happen, right? So I would always put, 72 hours after closing and funding. That way we can record it. The title company has a time when the money changed hands. It's very well kept, and it's a simple way to keep everybody out of trouble. Because the other thing they'll come back and do to you is they'll say, well, in the contract, the execution date doesn't really start till the next day. So is it 10 days from the day we signed the contract or 10 days from the next day?
And that's it's a valid point. It truly is.
It's a commission-ectomy waiting to happen. When they think they're going to move in on the 10th day and it's really the 9th day, and they have all their belongings in a U-Haul truck, and they're looking at you going, what the heck are we going to do? You're going to pay for a U-Haul truck, and you're going to pay for a hotel room. I hate these things.
No, absolutely. And I hope we're stressing to everyone how much they can be how many difficulties they can create. Deposit. This is where I ask for an extremely large deposit when I'm working with a seller's temporary residential lease, because again, the only way to make sure that property is left in good shape is I'm not going to close unless it's done. So with a deposit, I can say, listen, if you do not leave this property in good shape, don't steal the appliances, steal the light fixtures, whatever it is, I'm going to have a deposit here.
Yeah, that's actually great advice, because that's one of the biggest issues is they'll do the lease. You did the walkthrough maybe, but all their furniture was still. It happened to one I bought, where I had one of my buyers buy. They had this great big console in there that they kept all their TVs and all their radios and things in, right? And when we came in the next day to take possession after we'd already sold it and gave them their lease back, and that was gone, there was 3 holes in the wall and no paint behind it.
Well, I've got a horror story where I gave the seller the house I purchased and I actually still live in. I gave him a 3 days to move out. I went over that night to do measurements, and I pulled up to see an entire trailer full of light fixtures. He'd ripped the mailbox out of the ground. Every light fixture in the house he'd removed and replaced with a little cheap dome light. He'd ripped my mailbox out of the ground. I mean, it was a huge conversation of whoa.
Yeah,
this is not yours anymore. And it was, if I hadn't been there and seen it and been able to stop him in mid time, it could have been a huge nightmare. I would strongly say you need a deposit in there large enough to where a seller's going to think twice before doing certain things.
Yeah. And you need to make sure that the other agent, that's the one thing that I think we dropped the ball on, is not having a good enough conversation with the other agent when we do this to make sure that their client is being educated on what they can and they can't do within this lease.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a big deal, guys. We got to take care of that.
So we haven't read it. Paragraph 5 again, tenant shall pay to landlord at the time of funding the sale blank as deposit to secure performance of this lease by tenant. Landlord may use deposit to satisfy tenant's obligations under this lease. Landlord shall refund any unused portion of the deposit to tenant with an itemized list of all deductions from the deposit within 30 days after tenant surrenders possession of the property and provides landlord written notice of tenant's forwarding address. Again, those requirements are there. Tenant shall pay all utilities except, so again, the seller now is responsible for utilities through day until they move out, unless you have any changes you want to make. Use of property. Tenant may use the property only for residential purposes. Tenant may not. Same as before. Pets, same as before. Condition of property. Tenant accepts the property in its present condition and state of repair at the commencement of the lease. Upon termination, tenants shall surrender the property to landlord in the condition required in the contract, except normal wear and tear and casualty loss. Tenant may not alter the property or install improvements or fixtures without prior written consent of the landlord. Any improvements or fixtures placed on the property during the lease become the property of the landlord. Again, paragraph 11, do not put anything in there. Paragraph 12, landlord may enter the reasonable times of the property. Tenant shall provide landlord door keys and access codes to allow access to the property during the term of the lease. So the seller is required to give a copy of the keys and any codes to the buyer. Laws. Tenant shall comply with the applicable laws, restrictions, ordinances, rules, and regulations of this respect to the property. Repairs and maintenance, except as otherwise provided by lease. Tenant shall bear all expenses of repairing and maintaining the property, including not unlimited to the yard, trees, and tenants and shrubs, unless otherwise required by Texas property code. Tenant shall promptly repair at tenant's expense any damage to the property caused directly or indirectly by or any act or omission of the tenants or any person other than landlord, agents, or invitees. So the seller, even though you sold the home and are living there as a tenant, you have to fix any repairs that need to be done. So it's very important for you to understand. You sold it, you're acting as a tenant. If something breaks, you have to fix it prior to closing or prior to moving out.
Yeah, and where that gets really screwy is that, let's say you gave them money in lieu of repairs for whatever was in the as you were doing your inspection and moving through your first amendments to do repairs. If it breaks and it's not on that list, you're fixing it. That's just that's what that kind of says to us.
Yeah.
Don't think the money in lieu of repairs is going to cover something that wasn't on that list.
Tenant identifies landlord with claims of all third parties. So the same way, if someone gets hurt, the tenant's going to be responsible, not the buyer, which is not a nice thing. Insurance, again, this will work the same way. If the house burns down after the seller sells it, they no longer have insurance on it, and they may not have the same rental protection as far as their property goes. And the buyer is buying homeowners insurance to move into, most likely, and not renter's insurance, so they may not be covered if something happens. So your insurance has got to know what's going on, what you're doing, and how. Default works the same way as before. Termination works the same way. Holdover works the same way. And again, I want to make sure with holdover that it's going to be very inconvenient for you to stay in the home.
Right.
Attorney's fees, again, prevailing party. Smoke alarms. So as the buyer, you've bought this home. The seller is staying in the home. You are agreeing to go purchase smoke alarms and install them for the person you just bought the house from.
Yeah. And it's a 3-day lease, and you've agreed to do that.
Yeah. And think about that, guys. If something happens and there's a fire, they can now sue you for making their rental property unsafe.
Yep.
So it's kind of a weird thing. Again, security devices do not have to do not apply. You don't have to change them in the 90-day or less lease. Again, consult an attorney and notices that works the same way. So there are some definite similarities and a couple changes to the two forms that just you need to be aware of and see. But
guys, just be scared of this thing.
Be scared of it. What Kent told me and made me think about the last time I did this, though, we have a contract, and the contract says upon closing and funding. If we later decide we need to do a temporary residential lease, we now have to amend the contract to say that paragraph. I want to say 9.
Yeah.
A paragraph regarding possession. We're going to have to alter that in the amendment, saying that is now going to say according to the terms of a temporary residential lease, not upon closing and funding. So that is something that has to be done. So if you're doing a temporary residential lease, remember you now have to also amend the contract to say according to the terms of a temporary residential lease, not upon closing and funding.
And the reason you do it, and that's a technicality piece there, but the bottom line is once it's a contract, this is what we agreed to. But when you go into the court and the court looks at it and says, well, what did you originally agree to? And you say closing and funding, right? But we did this leak. Well, did you amend it? Because the only way to change a contract is to amend it. And if you didn't amend it, it's a loophole, but it's a loophole with a good attorney will take you down.
Remember, you're the professional being paid to help them through this transaction. So make sure your job is to make sure you cross every dot and dot every I.
There you go. Something like
cross
that.
Every T and dot every I. With that, Ken is up talking to us about our database. Ken, it's all yours.
So thank you very much. That's a good discussion, guys. I'll finish that discussion with one thing: stay away from them. If anything you can do to stay, that's just another issue.
I've never had
to deal with after that closes, and
I've never had a smooth. So I've never had a smooth temporary residential lease. No. Now, have I had some and they closed? Yes. Have I had some bomb? It's been a nightmare. Yes. Yeah. But I haven't been like, that was very pleasant. No.
Yeah. It's just not going to be, because nobody's ever going to be satisfied. Just try to, and I get it. There's circumstances that come up, and if they do, they do. But just, do your best to stay away from them. So, all right. So last week we talked about contact of our database. So again, we're going to talk about certain things that have to do with contact, care, and community in our database, right? How do we create an environment where people are willing to refer you to their friends and family members, right? That's the key to working your database, right? So you're gonna get contacts put into your database from all over the place, from sphere of influence, from internet leads, from different Facebook ads you run. I get that. I get that the leads come from everywhere. Once you get them and they go into your database, they now become your community, and you have to figure out how to manage that community to make sure that it's a constant turn. One of the things that I've always tried to do was have a relational business instead of a transactional business, right? I want to work with people that know and like me, right? Or be referred to by people that know and like me. That way I'm gonna have a way better experience, and my client's gonna have a way better experience, because it goes back to what we all talk about several times, and you'll hear me say it forever. The client just wants to know three things: can I trust you? Are you good at your job? And do you care about me? Right? That's what they want to know. So once you've got them in the database, now we've got them contacted. We know we're going to send them an item of value. We're going to make a phone call to them. We're going to do a pop by here and there. We're going to send them some type of e-report on the 15th of the month. But what we're going to spend most of the time on, the rest of the time today on, is personal notes. All right, personal notes are the one thing I'm telling you that will cost you the least amount of money, that will make you a fortune if you learn how to do it right. Right. And I know it seems pretty simple. Okay, and I'll just write them a note. Right. Okay. What you got to figure out is number one, who do you write a note to? What do you say in the note? Right. How in depth should the note be? And how often should I send that note? Okay. So the number one thing is you send the top 20% of your database gets a note every month. Okay. Those are the guys that know and love you. They're going to recruit you. You're just reminding them how great of people they are. And you're trying to send something out that makes them feel comfortable and good about you. Right. And the fact that they can trust you. And so that's where the handwritten note comes in so powerfully. So one of the things you got to think about is, is when you're doing a note, you need to get somewhere off by yourself, not sitting in a big room full of people that are hacking and talking and cocking on the phone and everything. Get somewhere where you can concentrate a little bit and think about your last conversation with them. So, Andrew and I, hypothetically, we had a conversation the other day, and he was telling me, how well his son's doing at football. Right. And I'm like, wow, so that I need to lock onto that, because that's what goes in my note. Man, I'm so excited to hear that about your son and how well he's doing in football. I can't wait to see what happens over the rest of the year. Right? Now, what did I just do? I just connected with Andrew on a personal level. Right? I didn't ask him if he wanted to buy or sell a house. Right? I'm not going to do that. What I want to do is connect with him on that personal level. I want him to go, when he's sitting there in the stands watching the kids play football, and he's sitting next to the guy he barely knows, because the kids just got on the team first year this year. And the guy says, we're fixing to have another baby. We're going to have another house. Now, we're pretending Andrew's not a real estate agent at the moment, right?
He's also not having any more babies.
Right. And but then he said, that's when I want him to say, oh, well, you need to call my buddy Kent. Okay. Now, why is he going to do that? Well, because I've learned how to use the personal note and the phone call to capture just a little piece of his mind. Most of you guys that listen to this may not be old enough to remember this, but I'll never forget when Microsoft came out and they first started putting the little icons on your computer, right? They'd have a little icon for every product they had. Instead of you having to go to DOS and open it all up like the old ancient people did, you could just go click on that icon. Well, think about what they did. Was they captured just a little tiny piece of your desktop, so you wouldn't go out somewhere else and look and try to find the product. It was already there, and it was right in front of you all the time, right? And so that's what the personal note does for us when we send it out, right? So this is the one thing. I don't care if you don't do a single other thing I ever talk to you about. If you'll learn to do this, 5 to 10 handwritten notes a day, it takes you about 15 minutes. It is the most valuable piece of your day you will ever do. I'm telling you, guys. So you got to think about that. Okay. So in most cases, a handwritten note with a handwritten envelope that comes in is going to be read. Okay. People don't take it, and I don't know if you guys are anything like it is around this house. When the mail comes in, we have the trash can on one side and the pile on the other side, right? And so we're looking, that's a trash, that's a trash, oh, we'll keep that one, that's a trash. You don't, your handwritten notes don't go in the trash if you send, don't put a label 1 on this thing. Handwrite your return address, handwrite their address. Okay. It just takes a few minutes, guys. It's not like we're trying to ask you to go run 1,000 of these a day. We're talking about 5 to 10 a day. I mean, you can handwrite that and get it in there. And then you handwrite the note, right? And so make sure that you take the time to do that. It makes all the difference in the world when Andrew picks up that note and goes, man, I can't believe Kent was thinking about me today. And it changes his whole mentality, right? And so that's a big piece of the care of your database, is making sure that they understand that, one, they can trust you, and another, that you care about them. Okay. Now they'll learn how good you are at your job once they refer somebody to you, but they're going to learn how that, one, they can trust you, and number 2, you care about them. So make sure you do that. Now, then you start thinking about, as a real estate agent, who should get a note. All right. So I'm calling through my database, and and somebody refers somebody to me. All right. All right. Okay. That person is not only getting a note, but most likely they're going to get a note, and they're going to get a scratch off ticket, or they're going to get a $5 Starbucks gift card. Right. And I'm not going to give it. So Andrew gives me a referral today. I'm not going to wait to see if that referral closes before I send that to him. I'm going to send it to him the instant he does it. Why? Because now what I've done is I've reinforced that activity. He's like, wow, man, that was kind of cool, and he wants to know that I'm helping his friend. If he sends me his friend, his expectation of me is to go help that person. Right. And so if I send him a handwritten note with just a little thank you in it, and we're talking about, that's $1, guys. That's not, I'm not trying to get you to spend massive amounts of money. Normally I have stacks of $5 Starbucks gift cards, $5 Sonic cards, stuff just stacked up everywhere. Right. So when somebody sends me a referral, they're going to get something right there on the spot. You'll learn how valuable that is. As you start doing it and you start tracking it, you're going to figure out that is probably one of the most valuable tools you'll ever have, is that handwritten note to the person that sends you a referral, because now their activity changes every time you do it. Right. And so think about that, and think about it, how it works, that it makes good sense. All right. Then the next person you want to start thinking about sending stuff to is your vendors. Right. So you have a vendor, and that vendor comes in and you get the inspection report back, find out we need to get, all the trees cut back off the house, or whatever it may be, and right now, I don't know if it's like that in El Paso, but around here, to get a vendor out in 2 weeks is a challenge. I'm just telling you, it's just a challenge, right? And so how do you become the person on the top of that list? All right. Well, every time my vendor does something for me, guess what I do? I write him a note. In that note, I'm going to put a scratch off or a $5 Sonic gift card, and I'm going to do it every time. Why? Because I want him, when he sees me call, to go, oh, Kent's going to do something. He needs me to do something, and he wants to come do it for me. He's going to figure out a way to do it if I'm the one constantly helping him do that. Right. I mean, that's just the way it is. Right. The other places that I send them to is, not only do I send them once we do something with a lender, okay, I always send the lender a handwritten note. So think about this. How many times does a lender get an inquiry about a loan prior to somebody telling them that they want to go buy a house? Lenders are huge referral sources, right? If you learn how to, you got to get that vendor on your side, though, right? Because remember, the lender's going to have 10, 12, 15 agents they're working with. Which one are they going to think about the most? The one that sent them Starbucks every week for when they're helping us out, right? Or the ones that just, said, oh, thank you, but great, I'm not even coming to close, and make sure that happens, right? I mean, think about it, because they're getting the inquiries all the time, but if you're not picking those leads up from them, it's because you haven't done your job to take care of your database, right? That's another person in your database, right? Send it, you have to. And then the other thing I tell you is, if the lender has an assistant, the lender's assistant is That's a critical person to make sure you don't forget, right? Because that assistant is doing most of the work and 90% of the communication after the fact. So don't forget about that person. For $5 to get a lead from somebody for a $300,000 to $500,000 house, do the return on investment on that one. It's not a bad deal, right? So guys, you got to think these things through, and you got to write the notes. Okay. Now, what you can't forget to do is the note has to have your business card inside of it. Okay. All right. If it's a referral, it's got to have something in there that says thank you, the scratch off or the gift card or whatever it might be. Okay. Don't go crazy on them. They just need to be a little, it's the act of doing it. It's not really what you sent, right? It's just the fact that nobody else is doing it for them, right? So think that too. So be sure you write them. Get you a pen. I got my favorite note writing pen right here. Why? Because it's just comfortable. I get, everybody's got pens they like. I know that's a weird thing, but people have pens they like.
Right? Oh, yeah, definitely.
Write with a pen you like. My penmanship is so bad to begin with, that if I don't have a pen I like, it really, like, you have no idea what I did, but you just say, hey, great, there's a Starbucks gift card in there, right? So you got to be, think those little bits and pieces of it through, and make sure that anybody around the transaction that helped you out in a manner that's, maybe just barely even went above and beyond, make sure you recognize those people. I mean, the poor girl that sits at the front of the title company, nobody recognizes her. I mean, ever, ever. With that situation, now she may not send me a bunch of leads, but when I send my paperwork over there, guess who's going to go to the top of the list? Because I was willing to do something for somebody that normally never gets any recognition whatsoever. I mean, guys, this stuff this ain't rocket science. This is you learning to have sales skills that have become lost in our new environment of technology. Everybody will shoot her an email. It's like the birthday card. We talked about this a lot last week, but it's like the birthday cards, guys. Everybody's going to go in and tell you happy birthday on Facebook or Instagram or wherever that pops up. You'll get 800 of those, but you won't get a single birthday card. And so 800 other people are doing it. Does that really separate you from anybody? Or if you're the only one that sends that card, does that separate you from everybody else? That's taking care of your database. That's taking care of the people that you specifically want them to have a habit of referring people to you for your business. And it cracks me up when I hear agents complain about, well, I can't believe they referred that to somebody else. And then my first question always is the same. It's the same question every time. It'd be the same question I'd ask anyone of you that listen to me. When was the last time you contacted that person? Well, it's my cousin. I hadn't talked to him in like 6 months. So what in the world makes you think they're going to send you a referral? Oh, I sent them an email. How many emails you get today, Andrew?
Probably 100, around 200 to 300.
How many did you actually read?
4.
Yeah. There you go. An email doesn't count anymore, guys. It just doesn't. You've got to do the things that take care of your database. And the number one thing is notes. I mean, I'm telling you, people, you'll go by, someday you'll go to a funeral, and not that that's a good thing, but it's life. It happens. And you'll look in the casket, and there'll be handwritten notes in the casket. And it's not like I've only seen that once. I've seen that a lot, and it's because they mean something to people. And when you mean something to somebody, they're going to remember you, right? It's just the way it works. So the care of your database becomes so important that you have to make that database so personal to everybody that's out there doing it that it's that they never think of real estate. Should be they should have one vision in their mind about real estate. I don't care if it's commercial, I don't care what it is. They should have one vision, and that should be your face. That's all they should be able to think about, because you're taking such good care of them, right? And when you're talking to them, listen to what they're saying, right? When you're talking to them and they say, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been in a conversation with somebody, and somebody would say, hey, I'm sending my kid off to college. We're fixing to be empty nesters. I am scared to death. Right. There's been kids in this house for the last 20 some years, and now we're going to be alone. I'm scared to death. Well, what do you do then? You jump on Amazon, you go into the book category that says how to deal with an empty nest. Right? Maybe you send them a book that they can download onto their phone, or that you can just have it sent straight to their house. Right? Why? Because I listened to you. And Andrew said, man, this is scary, man. And so I can be the one. And then what do? When I send the book, I handwrite him a note and say, oh, by the way, look, there's a book coming for you. I hope it helps. I mean, it's a simple thing. So, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but that horse will make you so much money if you keep riding it. I'm just telling you, so if you're not doing these notes, guys, it's the number one way to take care of your database. Right?
I will say, I don't think I've ever thrown away a handwritten note. I've got a drawer full of them.
Yeah. We were actually opened a box. We were moving some stuff around, trying to get our attic cleaned back up the way it was supposed to. And there was a box up there, and it was like notes and birthday cards and stuff like that. That's my wife and I, we've been married 36 years now, that we've been keeping. Some of them were from, that I got back when I was in high school. I mean, it's just crazy, and it's like, wow, and you don't think about it, but I bet we spent 2 hours instead of doing the attic. We spent 2 hours reading notes. I mean, it's just huge, guys. And so, so learning to follow the system that we're talking about here is critical. And I know my biggest challenge in today's real estate training environment is that we get trained on how to be transactional, right? We get trained on how do you go out there and pound internet leads, and how do you do all that, and that's all well and good, right? But once they become qualified, and in my mind, what qualified means is that I do real estate for a living. Okay, we don't have to be best friends, we don't have to be any of that. But once I do real estate for a living, it's now my responsibility to see if I can bring you into our community, right? And our community comes from calls, notes, pop buys, items of value, emails. That's where we do it, right? And it's simple. And I don't care where you originated. I don't care if you were a signed call. It doesn't make any difference, Now, I want to help you through the transaction if that's where you want to be. But once you've done it, we've had to transact. Here's my favorite thing, or not my favorite thing, the scariest thing that happened as me as a manager is I would be sitting in the office, and somebody would walk through the front door, and they'd say, we need to list our house. And I'd say, well, great. Who's your real estate agent? And they'd say, well, we bought it like 6 years ago, and I can't even remember what their name was. Now, what that tells me is that hurts my heart when I hear that. I'm just telling you. It's like, well, shame on you. You went through all the crud that we go through when we're putting a deal together, doing crazy buyers leases and sellers leases and fixing anything that you can imagine that you can't believe somebody says we need to fix, right? And we've done all these things, and then we didn't communicate with them anymore. Past clients, they've already been down the road with you guys. They already trust you. They already care about you. They're people that know and like you. And even if the deal doesn't go great, people's memories are short, man. I'm just telling you, just keep them in the system, keep dropping the notes to them, make sure that you're keeping contact of that community so that you can take care of them, because something's going to come up, and they're going to need something, and you want them to need you, and you want them to call you and ask you when it's time, right? You don't want them going to somebody else. You don't want them doing that. And there's no reason for them to. The only reason is we didn't take the time to care for our community, right? And so with that, that's my spiel for today.
Good stuff. Get nothing else out of this. Write notes, and don't do temporary residential lease. That's the important thing to remember.
Yeah, what a day, right? Yeah, don't do a lease. Write as many notes as you possibly can.
Absolutely. Ken, I appreciate it, sir. We'll see you next week.
Yep. Everybody have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
All right.